Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our Thursday night football preview for tonight's Patriots-Steelers game. Maybe not the banger of a matchup that we're hoping for, right? A 30-point over-under is not something that we're used to seeing out there, but still plenty of GPPs with our names on it, a few to take down, and over there on the prop side, a few slips that are calling our name over there on Prize Picks and Underdog. So, gonna make sure you guys are prepared with all the info that you need for tonight, and I know it's a little bit of a slog fest, but still a lot of money and a lot of opportunity that we can, go out there and try and exploit tonight. So a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and start it off with a look at the GPP side of things. Like you probably hear a lot from me, this is a slate to get different, and tonight, the prevailing narrative is going to be extremely strong. There's a low total here. You've heard all week about how there's going to be no scoring tonight, and people are going to build lineups with that in mind. And anytime you have that low scoring affair, whether it's two inefficient offenses, a really bad weather situation, it's real easy to predict ownership. So when you take a look at the running backs, also at the defenses here in a second, you're going to see that they're much, much higher owned than they typically are. So in Ezekiel Elliott, without Ramondre, as you'd expect, is extremely high owned, about owned in about 2/3 of all lineups. You go down to Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, they're both getting a ton of exposure. In fact, between the two are going to be owned in over 100% of lineups. You go down to the defenses, you got the Steelers at about 50%, you got the Patriots down here at about 30% ownership. So if you were to just take this slate, right, fade 2 or 3 out of those 4 players, you're good to go with your leverage, right? Pretty much everyone around them's lower owned than they should be. The top 2 receivers for the Steelers are coming in pretty low owned. The quarterbacks still getting some attention, but outside of those running backs and defenses, you're getting average, if not low ownership on almost every player on the slate, which is why I say it's a slate to be different, right? That narrative could very well come true tonight, but that's a fringe outcome, right? If we're going to see, sub 20 points scored, if we're going to see only running backs and defenses in that optimal lineup, first off, you're going to be sharing that equity with 50, 65% of the field with all 4 spots there. But on top of that, you're also going to be dealing with a fringe outcome, right? For all of those players to hit at the same time is asking quite a bit to happen. So tonight, I challenge pretty much everyone out there to go out there and maybe be a little bit more positive or optimistic about the scoring tonight. Maybe somebody like George Pickens can take off a long catch for a touchdown, right? He has plenty of run after catch ability. Also in the red zone, right, is getting a lot of targets. So maybe he scores 2 touchdowns. It gets to that optimal captain. Deontay Johnson, right? He's capable of going out there getting 7-8 catches in a game, right? Maybe that's his optimal, his path to the optimal out there. Heck, Mitch Trubisky, Bailey Zappi, right? Maybe they have a game, go out there through 250 yards. There are plenty of ways that you can shake that narrative, right? That narrative can go out there and get spoiled, where you can be sitting at low ownership in a lot of these contests, and frankly, better plays in terms of points per dollar. So, it's not to say that Jaylen Warren's a bad play, right? In fact, it's one of my favorite plays on the slate, which we'll talk about here in a second. Same thing with Ezekiel Elliott, right? It's not to say that he's a poor play out there, but if your whole lineup is building around that low scoring narrative that you're going to see everyone just copy and paste today, you're going to have a real tough time getting differentiation, right? These 2 running backs, you can still use them tonight, but just maybe in a different sort of game script, right? Maybe you're not pairing them with a bunch of defenses. Kickers too, right, are going to be pretty prominent in tonight's game. Maybe rather than using those sort of combinations, you take a Jaylen Warren with a Mitch Trubisky. You hope it's a little pass dump off touchdown that gets them there, right? Or maybe it's just the defenses don't get there at all, right? I think a lot of people forget that just a low-scoring game isn't going to get the defenses there, right? They've got to force turnovers. They've got to go out there and get points with sacks. Defensive touchdown, return touchdown does a lot for getting those to the optimal lineup. Those are fringe outcomes, right? Especially when you're talking about, getting 4 or 5 sacks, a few turnovers, that sort of thing. That's not something that regularly happens in every single game. So the low scoring script, I tend to agree with it, right? You're talking about 2 inefficient teams, but I think it's being way over-owned in some of these large field GPPs. So a few ways to get different, right? We talked about the 2 Steelers wide receivers. I think potentially taking a quarterback at captain will be unique, especially somebody like a Bailey Zappi at just 4.1%. Typically the quarterbacks are at least like 7-8% owned at captain. So the fact that we do have Bailey Zappi, who's a little bit expensive, right? He's $9,000, but we're very used to that with a lot of these quarterbacks. He's only 4% owned, right? He's one of the lowest owned captains of anyone towards the top of the board. maybe take a shot on Bailey Zappi, right? Even in games where the Patriots don't win, he could be your optimal captain if he throws 2 touchdowns tonight, which again is asking quite a bit for Bailey Zappi, but that's the same kind of fringe outcome as these defenses getting there, right? They're about the same sort of hit rate. Steelers defense is 12% owned. You've had 4.1% on a Bailey Zappi, right? That's why it's the plus EV way, especially in a large field contest, to go after some of these lower owned plays. A few other ideas, right? Jaylen Warren, right? We talked about him maybe getting a passing touchdown rather than a rushing touchdown. That's a way that you could be a little bit more different about Jaylen Warren getting there. He's $8,000. It's worth noting that Najee Harris is a little bit questionable coming into this game. He's been dealing with a knee injury, has not practiced to this point of the week, but has already come out and said that he's playing, right? He should play tonight. Might be a little bit limited, so that's really what we want to pay attention to there, and why I think Jaylen Warren is the play of the slate. If Jaylen Warren is even going to get like a 10, maybe 15% increase in snaps, it makes him the best points per dollar play on the entire slate. Now, there's a few value plays you'll see down here that slightly edge him, right? Like a Juju Smith-Schuster, for example. But in terms of your spend ups, right? If you're trying to spend your salary wisely, your best play is Jaylen Warren. He's not only going to contribute out of the backfield, obviously goes out there and contributes as a rusher, but if he's going to see 65, 70% of snaps, you're giving 70% of snaps to the most efficient running back in the NFL, right? If you look at all the numbers, right, this is well published at this point. I have been tooting this horn for over a year and a half at this point about how solid a runner Jaylen Warren is. On a per touch basis, there's no one better in the NFL. Right now, it's a smaller sample. They're not stacking the box against him as much as like a CMC, a Saquon, right? The guys that have all that name recognition. But he's up there in that category when it comes to efficiency. If we're going to give him 65% of snaps tonight, which is essentially what I'm calling for, but the split between him and Najee Harris, that makes him an incredible play. Gives him incredible upside out there. And if we're talking about just like my favorite play on the slate, like regardless of ownership, it's Jaylen Warren, right? You can make an argument for somebody like a Zeke, right? I know he's a little bit more expensive. Doesn't have to worry about a second running back like Najee breathing down his neck. But in terms of like your efficiency, I mean, Zeke well past his prime, right? He's not going to go out there and get us like an 80-yard touchdown. Jaylen Warren could end up with 150, 200 yards tonight, and I wouldn't be that mind blown about it, right? The guy takes 5-yard rushes for 80-yard rushes. He's done it like 4 or 5 times already this year. That's why I think he's one of the best plays on the slate. So Jaylen Warren going to be one of the spots that I'm getting well over the field on, especially if before lock, we hear that Najee Harris is limited, right? If we see him with a wrap on his leg before the game, if the beat reporter comes out and says, yeah, Najee's playing, but, so on and so forth, all of that is going to be a huge green light for Jaylen Warren. And if so, he might be a borderline lock for me if that's going to be the case. A few other ways to get different would be the Patriots wide receivers. It's also worth noting that tonight there's no Demario Douglas in the lineup, on top of not having Ramondre Stevenson, and Booty is going to be out, a wide receiver for the Patriots. So Devontae Parker last week was playing in a really nasty game against the Chargers. Wasn't that much production out there, but one thing I did notice is that Parker was getting a lot of targets, right? Especially with Douglas out of that game. So at $5,600, you have your essentially number one wide receiver for the Patriots here. That projects pretty well, right? 1.5x value. So you could take him to get a little bit different, right? He's only 28.7% owned. You could go down, take Juju Smith-Schuster. I've got the Juju shirt on right now, back when he was playing on the Steelers. It's his first time back in the Burgh, has not played in Pittsburgh, has not played against Pittsburgh, I believe, actually started in that game since he left. I believe the Chiefs played the Steelers, but he wasn't active for that game, might have been dealing with an injury. It's his first time back in the stadium. So if you're somebody that likes a good revenge narrative, is looking for a relatively low-owned play on the Patriots, right, he'll be the number 2 receiving option, he could potentially be somebody you keep an eye on. Allen Robinson has a huge chemistry with Mitch Trubisky, so he's also low-owned. You could get to him for a little bit of leverage. And then Jalen Reagor would be the last guy I really want to point out here for the video. I'm playing a few other guys down here as shots, but for the sake of the video here, Jalen Reagor at $1,600. He's had a few spike performances throughout the year, and he's that one wide receiver on the Patriots you could see getting a big play, right? He's got that speed. It's going to take a lot of those deep shots, those go routes out there for the Patriots, whereas Juju Smith-Schuster, not really as explosive at this point, right? If Juju's going to get there, it's going to be through a PPR kind of upside. Maybe he breaks off a screen pass for something like that. Whereas Jalen Reagor, a lot of it's that air yard sort of attack, right? Those down the field type of throws. And he's even lower owned than what you have with Juju too. So those are a few ways to get different. In general, I think the passing attack of the other team is the way to go out there and attack it, right? Like I said, those running backs, defenses, kickers are all at super inflated ownership numbers. And if you pretty much take anyone else, you're going to have a good time there. So you've got Connor Hayward down here, also worth noting. He's only $200. Probably worth a few looks on that end as well. It's worth noting if you're looking for access to everything you see on the sheet here. So of course, guys, over here to the right, we've got my player pool blacked out. We've got some script notes, right? Like how I'm using all the different players in my player pool, core plays, right? If I'm using them in my higher dollar lineups. And we also have a player note tab over here, which you can see it's a really large tab because I put in a huge description for not every player on the slate, but the players that I think are pivotal spots, right? So like a higher owned play, I'm definitely going to have some sort of note over there on to make sure that not only, right, you can get the info from the streams here, but my full thoughts before lock on everyone on the slate. So if you're looking for access to all of this uncensored, make sure to check out my Patreon page. There's the link down below. It's $15 a month for all of my DFS stuff. So whether it's for Showdown, main slates for every single week, that's how you can get access to that. So I've been wondering, right, where you can get all of my player pool, all the different players that I'm taking, right, you know, who I'm using at the captain spot, for example. That's exactly where you can get that info. All right, and now for some prop info. So over here on Underdog, we've got two props that are really catching my eye. So first off, we got this Jawan Bentley over 6.5 tackles plus assists. The reason why I like that one is the type of game, the type of, script I think the Steelers are going to run, right? It's going to be a lot of rushes, whether you have Najee in there and Warren, or whether it's just Jalen Warren. You're probably going to see 20 to 25 rushes. And Bentley, the number one tackler on the Patriots, also by far their best run stuffer. The more rushing opportunities that you give the Steelers, the more tackle opportunities you're going to have for Bentley. So if you're buying that predominant script, right, and when we're playing props, right, our thought process is a whole lot different than for DFS, right? For DFS, we're trying to consider some of the fringe outcomes, trying to go after low-owned, high-upside sort of plays. When we're playing props, we want to be much more conservative, right? That chalk script out there, that Vegas post, all that sort of fun stuff, you got to take a lot more seriously. And if you're going to buy that script, that's going to be a little bit more rushing heavy tonight, then guys like Bentley are going to be at a huge advantage. So he's like minus 125 towards the over, so you're not getting a ton of sportsbook value there, but just knowing the kind of game that we're likely to see, if we end up getting that script, Bentley should get 10, 12 tackles. I mean, he's by far the best run stuffer on that defense. If you look at their other top tacklers, it's like Kyle Duggar, it's like Jabril Peppers. It's a lot of their secondary and safeties that are getting a lot of the tackles. And then Jawan Bentley is like by far at the top in terms of your linebacker tackles. So if we do end up getting that sort of script, which the Patriots, right, are a huge underdog tonight, that is going to be a huge out there for that prop. And then the other prop I'm taking for the Steelers side is Deontay Johnson over 42.5 receiving yards. So this was at 41.5 like 5 minutes ago. As I've complained about like 20 times before during this content, shit bumps fast, right? So, shameless plug here too, right? If you want all my prop exposure before it bumps, check out the Patreon there too, right? There's a prop tier on there. So not only am I posting all the different DFS stuff that I'm getting to, all the prop stuff before it bumps, right? So I would still probably take it at 42.5. I'm not going to myself, right? I already have exposure at 41.5, but it's a 1 yard difference, right? So if you're willing to eat that 1 yard difference, I would definitely still get there. My thought process is that first off, he has a chemistry with Mitch. He had plenty of targets from Mitch after Pickett came out of the game last week. On top of that, he was minus 140 towards the over at 41.5. And this is a prop that I got at 39.5 on Monday. I got it at 40.5 over there on Prize Picks on Monday. And now it's up at 42.5. And frankly, I don't think a lot has changed in terms of the value, right? This is a player that has a relatively high floor. He's at 4.5 receptions on most sports books in terms of, that catch prop. 42.5 yards is reasonable. I know it's a low scoring game. Same thing with zappy passing yards that we'll get to here in a second. I think some of the receiving props are just way bent out of shape, right? The whole narrative that this is going to be just a run kind of game, there's some merit to that, but they're not only going to run the ball, right? These teams are still going to pass the ball 40, maybe 45% of the time, which in my opinion has some of these receiving numbers a little bit too low. All right, and now for our prize picks exposure. So Deontay still at 41.5 here, right? So the better line is over there on prize picks. And then the Bailey Zappi prop is honestly one of my favorite on the board. So kind of like we had with Bentley, there's not a lot of juice favoring Zappi here. There is the minus 140 juice in Deontay at 41.5, but I love the over, right? First off, quarterbacks against the Steelers have only gone under this line once all year. So a lot of the hype around the Steelers defense comes to the fact they don't let up many points, right? They've been winning games, but they still let up a lot of passing yards. And Zappi, though he didn't have the best week last week, right? If we look at his game log here, only had 141 yards against the Chargers. That's part of the reason we're getting this soft line. And I think a lot of people out there, maybe even the lines makers, don't realize how bad the weather was for that game. It was raining the entire time. There were heavy winds out there. The final score was 6-0 Chargers. So if you're using last week as a data point for really anything when it comes to the Patriots or over there for the Chargers, like we're going to have for later this week, you're making a massive mistake, right? And the week before that against Indy, he came in for the last drive, right? So a lot of the data that I think people are looking at out here with Zappi tonight is data that isn't useful at all, right? The data that I found useful is that he's still got 141 passing yards in an absolute monsoon, right? And you got a Steelers defense that they've been pretty decent against the run, right? Rattling up touchdowns. They still lit up quite a few yards through the air. So this was an over it took. He's at 158.5 on a lot of books. I think he was at like 154 over there on FanDuel, which I don't love. They're actually one of the sharper books that I take seriously. In my opinion, FanDuel is a lot sharper than like a Caesars or a Draftkings sportsbook, based on a lot of the lines. Well, that's just my personal opinion on it, right? Everyone has their own opinion about what they think is the sharpest mainstream book. But that's really the only negative data point here, right? Almost all the other sports books have him at 158.5 yards. And considering that the Steelers have not shut down many quarterbacks this year, I like his chances of going over. So obviously that Deontay prop, I wish it was still at the same number over there on Underdog, but it's a 1 yard difference. If you're really worried about that 1 yard, just play it over here on prize picks, right? I don't think they have that Bentley prop up. Yeah, they don't have any tackle props up over there on prize picks yet. Maybe by the time you're watching this video, they've added Bentley to the board. You can always make it a 3-man over there, right? Just try and take the 3 best props available. Assuming that they post Bentley at 6.5. And you can make that an easy way to get to your exposure instead. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Best of luck tonight, whether you're playing props or going over there and trying to take down a GPP. And let me know down in the comments what you guys end up winning tonight. So I appreciate all the support here on the channel. Smash that like button on the way out of here if you found this video helpful. And make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We'll have main slate content dropping this week. There's no golf, so a lot more time for that. And also plenty of showdown content through the rest of the year. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. Make sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys for all the content throughout the week.